Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the channel. And today I'm going to give my review of Halloween Havoc 1989. Starting off the evening, we'll go to our first match of the night. It is Z-Man versus Mike Rotunda. I thought it was an okay opening matchup for Halloween Havoc 89. Back and forth matchup between Z-Man and Mike Rotunda. Z-Man hits a drop kick on Rotunda. Z-Man then is keeping the pace after the drop kick. Mike Rotunda then goes for a crossbody, but Z-Man counters the crossbody with a roll-up, pins for the 3, and your winner of the match is the Z-Man. Hats off to the Z-Man for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our second match of the night. It is the Midnight Express and Dr. Death Steve Williams versus the Samoan SWAT team. Number one, I thought it was a good match, back and forth matchup between both teams, with the Samoan SWAT team keeping the pace of the match. And the Samoan SWAT team ultimately hit the finish, pins for the 3, and your winners of the match are the Samoan SWAT team. Hats off to the Samoan SWAT team for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night as well. It is Tommy Rich versus the Cuban Assassin. I thought it was an okay match. Back and forth matchup between Tommy Rich and Cuban Assassin, with Tommy Rich keeping the pace of the match. Tommy Rich ultimately hits a Lou Thez press on the Cuban Assassin, pins him for the 3, and your winner of the match is Tommy Rich. Hats off to Tommy Rich for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night as well. It is for the NWA Tag Team Championships. It is the Dynamic Dudes versus the Fabulous Freebirds. I thought this was a relatively good match. Back and forth matchup between both teams, with the Dynamic Dudes keeping the pace of the match. Johnny and Jimmy Garvin were both exchanging in the middle of the ring. Johnny hits a devastating power slam. Johnny hits a power slam. Or I should say Jimmy Garvin hits a power slam on Shane. Michael Hayes then goes for a DDT, but Johnny counters the DDT. Dynamic Dudes then go for the finish, and Jimmy counters it. And your winners of the match by pinfall are the Fabulous Freebirds. Hats off to the Fabulous Freebirds for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night as well. It is Doom versus the Steiner Brothers. I thought this was a good matchup as well. Back and forth matchup between Doom and Steiner Brothers, with the Steiner Brothers keeping the pace of the match. Scott hits devastating Frankensteiner. Then a woman then puts something into one of the members of the Doom's mask. Member of Doom then hits a headbutt on Rick, pins for the 3, and your winners of the match are Doom. Hats off to Doom for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night as well. It is for the NWA United States Heavyweight Championship. It is Lex Luger versus Brian Pillman. I thought this was a relatively good matchup as well. Back and forth matchup between Luger and Pillman, with Luger keeping the pace of the match. Pillman then hits a drop kick on Lex. Pillman then hits a somersault senton on Lex Luger for a near fall. Pillman then hits a springboard clothesline on Luger. Luger then sends Pillman neck first into the ropes, pins for the 3, and your winner of the match, and at that time still, the NWA United States Heavyweight Champion, is Lex Luger. Hats off to Lex Luger for getting the win in that matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night as well. It is the Road Warriors versus Skyscrapers. I thought this was a good matchup as well. Back and forth matchup between the Warriors and the Skyscrapers, with the Road Warriors keeping the pace of the match. Animal hits a devastating power slam on Sid. Road Warriors and Skyscrapers both exchange in the middle of the ring. Referee then sounds for the bell, and your winners of the match by disqualification are the Road Warriors. Hats off to the Road Warriors for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is the main event of Halloween Havoc 1989. It is Terry Funk and the Great Muta versus Ric Flair and Sting in a Thunderdome match. A couple of things I'm going to say about this match real quickly, man, before I even get into it. Number one, Bruno Sammartino was the special guest referee in this matchup, which I thought was absolutely awesome. Bruno Sammartino is an absolute legend. The other thing, too, about this matchup is when they lowered the cage, as they were lowering the cage, pyrotechnics were going off and everything like that. And there was some stuff actually on the cage, to kind of give it its character, if you will, of the Thunderdome. There was like some Halloween stuff on the cage. And when some of the pyro went off, some of the stuff on the cage actually caught fire. And you had, staff from WCW and stuff like that and NWA come out to try to put this fire out. Well, it was still on fire, and Muta actually climbed the top of the cage and sprayed the green mist into that flame and put the flame out, which I thought was absolutely cool and pretty cool by Great Muta. The match itself was a fantastic match, man. It was a back-and-forth match between both teams. Flair was landing his signature devastating chops on Terry Funk. Flair then hits a knee drop on Funk in the middle of the ring. Sting then hits a press slam on Muta. Flair and Sting was keeping the pace of the match. Funk and Flair then both exchanged in the middle of the ring. Funk was trying to escape the cage. Flair and Muta both exchanged on the outside. Flair then applies a figure 4 leg lock on Muta. Funk then hits a pile driver on Flair in the middle of the ring. Sting then hits a crossbody on Funk off the cage wall. Muta then is trying to escape. Flair is working on Funk's legs. Flair then applies a figure 4 on Funk. Sting then hits a splash, multiple splashes on Funk. Muta then attacks Bruno Sammartino. Ole Anderson then attacks Gary Hart. The towel gets thrown into the ring. And your winners of the match are Ric Flair and Sting. A couple things I'm going to say about this event, man. Number one, Halloween Havoc, to me, is one of my all-time favorite NWA, WCW pay-per-views of all time. And I'm not a big fan of the gimmick matches. I'm really not. But the Thunderdome match was awesome. I mean, the amount of talent that was in that main event with the Great Muta. You have Terry Funk, who's an absolute legend. Muta's an absolute legend in his own right. Then you have Sting and Ric Flair, one of the, two of the best wrestlers of all time and one of the two biggest rivals of all time between Flair and Sting, and having them work together in a tag team and go up against Terry Funk and Great Muta. It was just an awesome main event, man. I mean, all in all, some of the matches were pretty good. I mean, the opening match for Halloween Havoc 1989 was not all that great. I mean, I'm not a big fan. I don't think most people are a big fan of the Z-Man. Now, Mike Rotunda, I feel like Mike Rotunda doesn't get a whole lot of credit. I think Mike Rotunda is a really good wrestler. I really do. The Varsity Club back in the day, in the NWA days, was really good. I mean, you had Mike Rotunda, you had Kevin Sullivan, you also had Rick Steiner before, obviously, Rick Steiner going over and teaming up with his brother, and the Steiner brothers had a phenomenal career. But the Varsity Club was an awesome stable. It really was, and obviously Mike Rotunda went on later on to his career, went over to WWE, joined the likes of Ted DiBiase and created Money Incorporated. Mike Rotunda is severely underrated. But Mike Rotunda is also not going to give you a 5-star match. But the man can wrestle. I will give Mike Rotunda that. And Z-Man, I mean, like I stated, I'm not a big fan of the Z-Man. I don't think Z-Man really lasted all that long in professional wrestling. And it seemed very lackadaisical. And I feel like Mike Rotunda was kind of carrying the match, if you will, when it comes to giving the fans a good show. The Midnight Express, Steve Williams, and Samoa SWAT team tag team matchup was actually not that bad. Tommy Rich versus Cuban Assassin, honestly, could have done without. I think the finish was kind of lackadaisical with the Lou Thesz press. One of my other favorite matches on here, too, is Doom versus the Steiner Brothers. I'm a big fan of the Steiner Brothers, but I feel like Doom was severely underrated. They could have been multi-time tag team champions. I mean, you had Farouk or Ron Simmons, and you also had Butch Reed. And I feel like Butch Reed was severely underrated throughout his entire career in professional wrestling. So to have, Ron Simmons and Butch Reed team up and be known as Doom, they should have been multi-time tag team champions. The Steiner Brothers, phenomenal tag team, one of my all-time favorites. The other match that I really liked on here, too, that I really did enjoy was Lex Luger versus Brian Pillman. And I mentioned this a couple of times, in my other shows that I've done. Lex Luger, from the mid to late 80s, I mean, he was the man for NWA, WCW back in the day. He was. I mean, could have been multi-time world heavyweight champion. I believe he defended the U.S. NWA United States Heavyweight Championship multiple times. And, I mean, he had the whole gimmick, man. I mean, he was Lex Luger. He was the total package. He had the look. He had the charisma. He had the promo skills at the time, in my honest belief. And I've always stated this in the past, too. Lex Luger, one of my favorite gimmicks Lex Luger ever had throughout his entire career was the narcissist Lex Luger. I thought it fit him perfectly, and I love the character. I really did. But in his early heyday in NWA, I mean, Lex Luger, was one of the best wrestlers NWA, WCW had to offer. And Brian Pillman, severely underrated, man. Brian Pillman, obviously him being a smaller guy in professional wrestling, Brian Pillman can hang with pretty much anybody as far as Ric Flair, Lex Luger, and the list goes on. So, but all in all, this was a solid event. I mean, if I had to give this a rating from 1 out of 10, I'm going to give it a solid, probably 7, 7.5 at best. But this is my review of Halloween Havoc 1989. I hope you guys are out there staying safe. Be careful, and remember, stay classic. Peace.